Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, Part 4, The Starship, Chapter 19. Sometimes the traveling symphony thought that what they were doing was noble. There were moments around campfires when someone would say something invigorating about the importance of art, and everyone would find it easier to sleep that night. At other times, it seemed a difficult and dangerous way to survive and hardly worth it, especially at times when they had to camp between towns, when they were turned away at gunpoint from hostile places, when they were traveling in snow or rain through dangerous territory, actors and musicians carrying guns and crossbows, the horses exhaling great clouds of steam, times when they were cold and afraid their feet were wet. Or times like now, when the heat was unrelenting, July pressing down upon them, and the blank walls of the forest on either side, walking by the hour, and wondering if an unhinged prophet or his men might be chasing them, arguing to distract themselves from their terrible fear. "All I'm saying," Dieter said, 12 hours out of St. Deborah by the water, "is that quote on the lead caravan would be way more profound if we hadn't lifted it from Star Trek." He was walking near Kirsten in August. "Survival is insufficient." Kirsten had these words tattooed on her left forearm at the age of 15 and had been arguing with Dieter about it almost ever since. Dieter harbored strong anti-tattoo sentiments. He said he'd seen a man die of an infected tattoo once. Kirsten also had 2 black knives tattooed on the back of her right wrist, but these were less troubling to Dieter, being much smaller and inked to mark specific events. "Yes," Kirsten said, "I'm aware of your opinion on the subject, but it remains my favorite line of text in the world." She considered Dieter one of her dearest friends. The tattoo argument had lost all of its sting over the years and had become something like a familiar room where they met. Mid-morning, the sun had not yet broken over the tops of the trees the symphony had walked through most of the night. Kirsten's feet hurt and she was delirious from exhaustion. It was strange, she kept thinking, that the prophet's dog had the same name as the dog in her comic books. She had never heard the name Luli before or since. "See, that illustrates the whole problem," Dieter said. "The best Shakespearean actress in the territory and her favorite line of text is from Star Trek." The whole problem with what? Kirsten felt that she might actually be dreaming at this point, and she longed desperately for a cool bath. "It's got to be one of the best lines ever written for a TV show," August said. "Did you see that episode?" "I can't say I recall," Dieter said. "I was never really a fan." "Kirsten?" Kirsten shrugged. She wasn't sure if she actually remembered anything at all of Star Trek, or if it was just that August had told her about it so many times that she'd started to picture his stories in her head. "Don't tell me you've never seen Star Trek Voyager," August said hopefully. "That episode with the Lost Borg and 7 of 9? "Remind me," Kirsten said, and he brightened visibly. While he talked, she allowed herself to imagine that she remembered it. A television in the living room, a ship moving through the night silence of space, her brother watching beside her, their parents, if she could only remember their faces, somewhere near. The symphony stopped to rest in the early afternoon. Would the prophet send men after them, or had they been allowed to leave? The conductor sent scouts back down the road. Kirsten climbed up the driver's bench of the third caravan. A dull buzz of insects from the forest, tired horses grazing at the side of the road. The wild flowers growing by the roadside were abstract from this vantage point, paint dots of pink and purple and blue in the grass. Kirsten closed her eyes, a memory from early childhood before the collapse, sitting with a friend on a lawn, a game where they had closed their eyes and concentrated hard and tried to read one another's minds. She had never entirely let go of the notion that if she reached far enough with her thoughts, she might find someone waiting, that if 2 people were to cast their thoughts outward at the same moment, they might somehow meet in the middle. "Charlie, where are you?" She knew the effort was foolish. She opened her eyes. The road behind them was still empty. Olivia was picking flowers below. A little farther, the conductor was saying, somewhere below, and the horses were being harnessed again, the caravans creaking into motion, the exhausted symphony walking onward through the heat until hours later they set up camp by the roadside, the ones who remembered the lost world thinking longingly of air conditioning even after all these years. "It just came out of a vent?" Alexander asked. "I believe so," Kirsten said. "I'm too tired to think." They walked for all but 5 of the 18 hours since they'd left St. Deborah by the water, through the night and morning and deep into the afternoon, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the prophet. Some of them took turns trying to sleep in the moving caravans, others walking and walking, until their thoughts burned out one by one like dying stars, and they fell into a fugue state wherein all that mattered or had ever existed were these trees, this road, the counterpoint rhythms of human footsteps and horses' hooves, moonlight turning to darkness, and then the summer morning, caravans rippling like apparitions in the heat, and now the symphony was scattered here and there by the roadside in a state of semi-collapse while they waited for dinner to be ready. Half the symphony had set off in pairs to hunt rabbits. The cook fire sent a plume of white smoke like a marker into the sky. Air conditioning came out of a vent, August confirmed. You'd press a button and whoosh, cold air. I had one in my bedroom. Kirsten and August were setting up tents, and Alexandra, whose tent had been set up already, was lying on her back staring up at the sky. "Oh," Alexandra said, "so it was electricity or gas?" August looked at the tuba, who was sitting nearby with his daughter half asleep in his arms. Olivia had announced that she was too tired to wait for dinner, so he'd been telling her a bedtime story about a mermaid while Lynn set up their tent. "Electricity," the tuba said. "Air conditioners were electric." He craned his neck to see his daughter's face. "Is she asleep?" "I think so," Kirsten said. This was when she heard the exclamation from the third caravan. "What the F?" someone said. "Damn it, who is this?" And she stood up in time to see the first cello haul a girl out of the caravan by the arm. Olivia sat up, blinking. "A stowaway." August was grinning. He'd been a stowaway himself once. "We haven't had a stowaway in years." The stowaway was the girl who'd followed Kirsten and St. Deborah by the water. She was crying and sweaty, her skirt soaked with urine. The first cello lifted her to the ground. "She was under the costumes," the first cello said. "I went in looking for my tent." "Get her some water," Gil said. The conductor swore under her breath and looked off down the road behind them while the symphony gathered. The first flute gave the girl one of their water bottles. "I'm sorry," the girl said. "I'm so sorry. Please don't make me go back." "Diallo, I'll ask you more about Arthur Lee." "We can't take children," the conductor said. "This isn't like running away and joining the circus." The girl looked confused. She didn't know what a circus was. Incidentally, the conductor said to the assembled company, "This is why we check the caravans before we depart." "We left St. Deborah in kind of a hurry," someone muttered. "I had to leave," the girl said. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I'll do anything, just—" "Why did you have to leave?" "I'm promised to the prophet," the girl said. "You're what?" The girl was crying now. "I didn't have any choice," she said. "I was going to be his next wife." "Jesus," Dieter said. "This goddamn world." Olivia was standing by her father, rubbing her eyes. The tuba lifted her into his arms. "He has more than one?" asked Alexandra, still blissfully ignorant. He has 4, the girl said, sniffling. "They live in the gas station." The conductor gave the girl a clean handkerchief from her pocket. "What's your name?" "Eleanor." "How old are you, Eleanor?" 12. "Why would he marry a 12-year-old? He had a dream where God told him that he was to repopulate the earth." "Of course he did," the clarinet said. "Don't they all have dreams like that?" "Right. I always thought that there was a prerequisite for being a prophet," Saeed said. "Hell, if I were a prophet—" "Your parents allowed this?" the conductor asked, simultaneously making a shut-up motion in the direction of the clarinet and Saeed. "They're dead." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Were you spying on me in St. Deborah?" Kirsten asked. The girl shook her head. "No one told you to watch us?" "No," she said. "Did you know Charlie and the 6th guitar?" Eleanor frowned. "Charlie and Jeremy?" "Yes. Do you know where they went?" "They went to the Museum of Civilization," Eleanor said museum very carefully, the way people sound out foreign words of whose pronunciation they're uncertain. "The what?" August whistled softly. "They told you that's where they were going?" "Charlie said if I could ever get away, that's where I could find them." "I thought the Museum of Civilization was a rumor," August said. "What is it?" Kirsten had never heard of it. "I heard it was a museum someone set up in an airport." Gil was unrolling his map, blinking short-sightedly. "I remember a trader telling me about it years back." "We're headed there anyway, aren't we? It's supposed to be outside Severn City." The conductor was Peering over his shoulder, she touched a point on the map far to the south along the lakeshore. What do we know about it? The tuba asked. Do people still live there? I've no idea. It could be a trap, the tuba murmured. The girl could be leading us there. I know, the conductor said. What to do with Eleanor? They knew they'd risked accusations of kidnapping, and they had long adhered to a strict policy of non-intervention in the politics of the towns through which they passed, but no one could imagine delivering a child bride back to the prophet. Had a grave marker with her name on it already been driven into the earth? Would a grave be dug if she returned? Nothing for it but to take the girl and press on into the unknown south, farther down the eastern shore of Lake Michigan than they'd ever been. They tried to engage Eleanor in conversation over dinner. She'd settled into a wary stillness, the watchfulness of orphans. She rode in the back of the first caravan so that she'd be the least momentarily out of sight, at least momentarily out of sight if anyone approached the symphony from the rear. She was polite and unsmiling. What do you know about the Museum of Civilization? They asked. Not very much, she said. I just heard people talk about it sometimes. So Charlie and Jeremy had heard about it from traders? Also the prophet's from there, she said. Does he have family there? I don't know. Tell us about the prophet, the conductor said. He'd come to St. Deborah by the water not long after the symphony had left Charlie and Jeremy there, the head of a sect of religious wanderers. The sect had moved into a Walmart at first, a communal encampment that had once been the lawn and garden department. They told the townspeople they'd come in peace. Oh, for heaven's sakes. They told the townspeople they had come in peace. A few people were uneasy about them, this new population with vague stories about travel in the South, in the territory once known as Virginia and beyond. Rumors held that the South was exceptionally dangerous, bristling with guns, and what might they have done to survive down there? But the new arrivals were friendly and self-sufficient. They shared their meat when they hunted. They helped with chores and seemed harmless. There were 19 of them, and they mostly kept to themselves. Some time passed before the townspeople realized that the tall man with blond hair, who seemed to be their leader, was known only as the prophet and had 3 wives. I'm a messenger, he said, when introduced to people. No one knew his real name. He said he was guided by visions and signs. He said he had prophetic dreams. His followers said he was from a place called the Museum of Civilization, that he'd taken to the road in childhood to spread his message of light. They had a story about setting out in the early morning and then stopping for the day only a few hours later because the prophet had seen 3 ravens flying low over the road ahead. No one else had seen the ravens, but the prophet was insistent. The next morning they came upon a collapsed bridge and a riverside funeral, women singing, voices rising over 3 white shrouds. 3 men had died when the bridge fell into the river. Don't you see? The prophet's followers said. If not for his vision, that would have been us. When the winter fever struck St. Deborah by the water, when the mayor died, the prophet added the mayor's wife to his collection and moved with his followers into the gas station in the center of town. No one had quite realized how much weaponry they had. Their stories about travel in the South began to fall into place. Within a week, it became obvious that the town was his. Eleanor didn't know why the prophet's dog was named Luli.